Usually at the beginning of these year-end videos, I either have some big spiel about how amazing a year it's been for games, or the lack of great releases leads me to get personal about the existential crises that emerge from running a YouTube channel about them. And as I sit down to do this for the 5th time now, I kind of feel somewhere in the middle. For a good chunk of the year, I thought we'd bounce back from an underwhelming 2018 with a whole bunch of incredibly solid games, but looking back on the year as a whole, it's odd how little an impact a lot of those titles seem to have had on me personally. A lot of games I enjoyed playing at the time, but now struggle to feel any kind of way about, some games I liked, but not enough to finish, and the occasional critical darling here or there that just happened to do absolutely nothing for me. And I think this mindset is reflected in my video output this year, with just as much of a focus on older titles as 2018, and a surprising amount of time spent with games you might consider not so good, examining the things that made them unintentionally interesting to me. Coming into 2019, I really didn't think I had the energy to give to games like this, but weirdly, the time and effort that went into those videos didn't feel like wallowing in negativity to me. If anything, it was energizing. I think those pieces made for some of the work I'm most proud of on the channel. They allowed me to reflect, to explore what I value in media, forced me to be more creative in my writing, and ultimately storytelling ability. And when I look at the games that really did stick with me this year, the ones that ultimately made this list, it's a similar pattern that emerges. Not always the most perfect or polished titles, but the ones that encourage exploration, reflection, and player expression. And even with that in mind, while it's becoming ever clearer that 2017 really was a standout year for the medium, it was still pretty difficult narrowing this down to 5 games. And so, without any further ado, let's get into the Writing on Games top 5 games of 2019, that I played obviously, and also this list is based purely on my own personal opinion, and if your list is different that's fine, with some honourable mentions thrown in for good measure. And to begin, at number 5 we have Ace Combat 7. There were a good few comments on my initial review of this game timestamping specific sections of gameplay and how tense it made people feel just watching, where a first-person machine gun run saw me perilously low to the ground, or an unexpected lightning strike would send me cascading towards seemingly certain doom, forcing me to push on the analog stick as hard as I goddamn could while upside down. And it's all down to the fact that despite a story whose unbearably dull delivery does a disservice to the wild anime nonsense it depicts, I still can't get over the fact that the lore of this series stretches back to the 1100s, the narrative created through Ace Combat 7's gameplay made for some of the most genuinely thrilling moments I've experienced in a game all year. Those moments where you're acting on sheer instinct, you come out of the other end wondering how the hell you managed to survive it all. And it's how the game makes you work for those moments that makes them so tense and exciting. The game's inspired less is more mission design limits your reliance on things like special weapons or your radar, turning a game where you fly some planes about into this massively dynamic set of levels whose scenarios can range from all-out bombast to stealth missions requiring the utmost precision, each one constantly forcing you to rethink strategies you'd otherwise take for granted. It's also one of the more punishing games I played in 2019, where one screw-up, a mere clipped wing at such high speeds, can cost you upwards of 20 minutes of progress. It can be incredibly frustrating, sure, but thanks to the game's immensely snappy and intuitive controls, these ridiculous maneuvers are made all the more rewarding when you pull them off. It may have made me want to break my controller at points, but there's no denying that whenever I look back on my time with Ace Combat 7, I'm consistently overwhelmed by the urge to take to those skies one more time. And at number 4 we have A Short Hike. This game is about as close to doing what it says on the tin as you can get. Here's a title that tasks you with getting to the top of a hill, an objective that can be conquered in about an hour and a half if you go in totally blind. It also happened to be charming beyond words, asking the question, what if Breath of the Wild was just one mountain, and answering it with a game that captures all the joy of climbing and exploration in 2017's Epic within a gorgeous, colour-drenched, deliberately pixelated package, replete with a soundtrack recalling nothing if not the whimsy of a game like Klonoa. There's a refreshing focus to everything you do in A Short Hike. You need phone signal, the top of the mountain has phone signal, you go get phone signal. There's no deep, dark secret to the island you're on, it's just a cozy environment you run, climb and glide around, housing a bunch of anthropomorphic animals like yourself going about their day. It's a fun little romp. but this simplicity masks the game's real heart that made itself apparent to me at the game's conclusion. Without actually spoiling anything past the fact that you complete the hike, the conversation at that peak contextualized a lot of what I'd come to adore about the game's writing. None of it was overly sentimental or saccharine, it wasn't trying to tug on your heartstrings in the way that a lot of cutesy indie games tend to do. For the vast majority of my playtime, it was just really legitimately funny. And yet, when I got to the top and answered that phone, I couldn't help but cry. I've had almost that exact conversation about a pretty scary situation and seen the way people tend to deflect that stuff for the sake of the person on the other end. It's all presented so simply, but at the same time so ingrained with all the weird human complexity of tiptoeing around a conversation like that for a moment I forgot I was playing as a weird little bird. For a short, colourful little lo-fi game about hanging out on an island, it's remarkably true to life in a way that I totally did not expect and hit me like a ton of bricks, and that seemed pretty special to me. And at number 3 we have Resident Evil 2. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't an aspect to this job where the unvarnished experience of a game fades into the background as you replay sections time and time again, less focused on a title's overall atmosphere than you are on recording footage or examining a level, system, or mechanic in detail. You know, here I am running circles around Mr. X, talking a big game about how he isn't a true threat, he's basically just designed to keep you moving, he's a system you can cheese, he's predictable. And yet, with the Resident Evil 2 remake specifically, there's still a part of me that sees this hulking dude mere feet away from me, the one that's been stalking me for a good portion of this game, and my brain tells me, man, you've got to get out of here, he's right there. I've played through this game multiple times, I know he can't get me in the clock tower, but god damn, those footsteps pounding through my ears still send chills down my spine. See, Resident Evil 2 is a game where every individual element of its design is crafted masterfully, without any one of those elements overshadowing the goal they all share, to make you feel unsafe. A series of gloriously interconnected systems aided by similarly glorious level design, ensuring the combination of Lickers and Mr. X in a tight corridor remains a gut-wrenching prospect, also sends my analytical brain into overdrive as I excitedly envision the optimal path through here on my next go-around. I've never been the kind of guy to get super into speedrun strats, but Resident Evil 2's pitch-perfect design inspired that spark in me. Its graphical fidelity is almost unmatched, but instead of trying to dazzle you with that fact, it chooses to bathe its amazing textures in darkness, creating these deeply unpleasant environments. Dingy offices slick with grime and viscera. It doesn't need to shove in your face how good it looks, it's a horror game, it doesn't want you feeling comfortable in this station. And it's this confidence in the developer's ability to unsettle you that allows for a truly suffocating sense of dread that doesn't diminish even after close inspection, but is always fun. The game just works however you approach it. I think it would be incredibly difficult to argue that this isn't one of the best remakes ever created. And the runner-up for Game of the Year is The Outer Wilds. Over the last year, I've probably had more requests to make a video on The Outer Wilds than any other game released in 2019. There's a mystique to it that I guess people want decoded somehow, but honestly, after making YouTube videos for the last almost half-decade, I can't tell you how refreshing it's been to get totally sucked into that mystique myself. To have a game where I'm not thinking about what kind of video I'd want to make, one I allow myself to just take my time with. I've been playing The Outer Wilds pretty consistently in between videos since it was released back in May, gradually uncovering more of its densely layered secrets in each of its half-hour loops, imbuing what is, on the surface, a space exploration game with some real detective-esque intrigue that really isn't that dissimilar to something like Sam Barlow's recent work. As I'd find a new detail, a text entry I'd missed my last time round, or a hidden switch leading to some whole new path, my log would fill up with as many new questions as I was finding answers. Each death leaving me tantalizingly on the brink of a new discovery, itching to spend half an hour more in this universe. And similarly to a short hike, a big part of this continued engagement comes down to its focus. Perhaps this is an unfair comparison, but it's basically No Man's Sky in miniature. 18 quintillion planets suddenly turns to like 8. And while No Man's Sky is its own thing, Outer Wilds really speaks to the idea that a small handful of meaningfully crafted planets is always going to win out over an unfathomable number of similar environments spat out by an algorithm. And what's more, just because it's smaller doesn't make it any less dense. I spent my first 45 minutes or so just exploring the starting planet. So charming were its denizens and the tone of their writing. The lilting acoustic guitar seemed to suggest a real light-hearted adventure that lay before me, only for me to board board my rickety spaceship, enthusiastically point at the first planet that took my fancy, and subsequently find myself hurtling uncontrollably into a gas giant, or exploring this curious little bramble at the edge of the solar system, or find myself falling into a black hole and floating aimlessly through the void of space and oh god, oh god, oh god. Given the thought of that endless vacuum on its own is enough to send my anxiety into overdrive, that whole process was terrifying, but ultimately that's what's so great about the Outer Wilds. It makes space feel small enough to seem conquerable, to feel rewarding when you solve its mysteries entirely on your own terms, but also vast enough to be utterly paralysing. And as usual, before we get to my number one pick, it's time for some unranked honourable mentions. Devil May Cry 5 might not be as completely wild and wacky as 3, its level design may devolve into semi-intestinal corridors that unceremoniously funnel you from fight to fight, but that really doesn't matter a whole lot when you also get to spend so much time with one of the tightest combat systems in all of action games. Few things give me as much joy as the simple act of unleashing Dante's confoundingly expansive moveset on his many foes. Plus, I hereby decree this kind of previs cutscene to be a mandatory inclusion for every game from now on, thank you. For as much as Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice brought with it maybe the most intense version of the now inevitable "does this game need an easy mode" conversation that occurs whenever a game like this releases, thanks to its combat whose speed often goes beyond even Bloodborne, I could never shake the feeling that with its training mode, a remarkably streamlined set of options, and a story that no longer requires hours of sifting through item descriptions to get a grasp on, Sekiro might be one of the more approachable FromSoft titles. And what's more, it's fantastic. It's balletic swordplay perfectly capturing the dynamics of battles from old samurai movies, for example, with a flurry of clashing swords culminating in that one decisive strike, making for some of the most gratifying fights I've experienced in these games. Sam Barlow and Team's Her Story is basically the reason I started this channel, so needless to say I was more than excited to play its spiritual follow-up, Telling Lies. It's Her Story, but polished up for a slightly more mainstream crowd, trading in the CRT haze and piercing office lighting for a cozy apartment with a sleek Mac interface. Less postmodern detective game goes horror, and more a straight-up thriller whose events you're largely putting in order. And while it's not quite as mind-blowing as 2015's game as a result, it's difficult to think of a team that is so pushing the boundaries of how games convey their narratives, quite like Barlow's, and I believe that definitely deserves commendation. In my video on Snakey Bus earlier this year, I described it as Speed but directed by Luis Buñuel, a surrealist exercise in destructive mundanity, where instead of absolute chaos, its whole atmosphere was unsettlingly relaxing. A lot of this comes down to how kind of broken the game is, with each level across its short playtime feeling more and more thrown together. But its central mechanics are so satisfying that getting lost in these hypnotic worlds ended up becoming an oddly meditative process. You know, part of me wants more from Snakey Bus, more levels, more care put into them, but a bigger part of me just appreciates what a weird, comforting little thing this ended up being. Eliza seems like a bit of a left turn for developers Actronics, whose prior output focused on solving complicated, open-ended problems. It doesn't seem like they'd be particularly well suited to a visual novel, where you're given basically no option but the AI-determined correct answer. But in applying this framework to something as complex as mental health, it allows the game to go super deep on all aspects of technological industry. Labour politics, the value of art, the failures of the US healthcare system, startup culture, and the well-intentioned people that get sucked into its personality cult. Ultimately, the developer's previous games are about the satisfaction that comes from closing the loop on labyrinthine systems, but Eliza goes one step further, illustrating just how difficult it can be to simply exist in a world governed by those systems. If anything I've said here has interested you, I'd implore you to pick this one up. And unfortunately, I haven't had the time to get into Disco Elysium until really recently, so I couldn't finish it in time for Game of the Year, but while playing, I'd been so hooked on every word of its stunningly written conversations that I knew this was a game I had to give a nod to at least. I'll be returning to this over the new year for sure. And it's a similar case with Watam, the latest from the mind of Katamari's Keita Takahashi. It came out too late in the year for me to feel fully confident putting it on my main list, but god damn if I didn't have a smile on my face for the entirety of its short duration. Its outwardly jumbled aesthetic hides a fairly streamlined design, and its vision of conquering isolation and loneliness in the post-apocalypse is surprisingly touching. Expect a video on this in 2020. And while we're here, yes, I had an experience with Death Stranding. I think the way its movement controls convey the latent, omnipresent feeling of danger within nature turns the simple act of running down a hill unscathed into a mechanically complex and rewarding process. I think the social features are genuinely fantastic, and that despite the multiple crippling issues to be found with the game's writing, it's impressive how Kojima managed to gamify his absurdist musings on life. I do not believe games need to be quote-unquote fun or hold your hand to be meaningful, quite the opposite actually. The game is to be respected for providing such a different experience within the AAA space. I just think it could have been genuinely transcendent had it been about 10 hours long as opposed to 40. And with all that out the way, I'm happy to announce that the Writing on Games Game of the Year for 2019 is Judgment. As I said at the start, this list isn't about games being perfect. Besides the fact there's no goddamn karaoke, Judgment's detective mechanics are stiff to the point of triviality. Tailing missions are tedious and prone to glitching as soon as you take one step off the beaten path. In all, the points at which it strays from the Yakuza formula in order to shove in some Ace Attorney features because the protagonist is a detective/lawyer, I guess, are pretty universally Judgment's weakest moments. But that's the thing, is it's become something of a personal project of mine to fully explore and get to grips with the Yakuza franchise over the last couple of years. It's emerged as one of my favourite series ever. I could draw you a map of Kamurocho from memory. I've spent so many hours running around beating up drunkards in its neon-drenched streets, and not once have I begrudged that time. My appreciation, my excitement for these games has only grown. I totally understand the developers feeling the need to change up the formula after toiling at Yakuza games for well over a decade at this point. But for them to come out with Judgment as their brand new thing is testament to just how unique a framework the Yakuza design has always been and remains to be. Playing through a whole bunch of the earlier games in quick succession, you realise just how many tweaks they've made between entries to get to this point, where Judgment feels like an almost entirely different game. A confident statement that no one else is making these kinds of open worlds, and Judgment is arguably Toshihiro Nagoshi's team at its peak. Its rigidity and how it seems to break up exploration, action and story belies the game's allowance for a surprising level of player expression that goes way beyond most open world titles. Sure, you're not rampaging through the streets blasting away innocent civilians, but when that's your only means of self-expression in a game, it's hard to really feel like you're saying much. It's too distant from reality. Whereas here, you can slack off from work in order to get liquored up and play some arcade games before backing some dude's martial art ebook on Kickstarter. It's a relatable level of mischief rather than outright carnage, indicative of a dude who just values fun rather than an out-and-out psychopath. And of course this is pretty typical of a lot of Team Dragon's work, but what's more impressive, what takes Judgment that step further, is how it uses this expression to convey protagonist Yagami's character through play. You know, the Prohibition-era noir detectives the team is clearly drawing from in their portrayal of this ex-lawyer turned investigator often relied on booze to an unhealthy degree, and so they force the player to make the choice between maintaining their buzz so they can fight better, or eating to regain health at the risk of sobering them up. It incentivizes self-destructive habits, because that's the way Yagami's mind works. He's a bit of a mess, and understandably so. He finds himself at the crossroads of organised crime and the complicated, real-world politics of the Japanese legal system, constantly pulled back and forth between the bitterness of being chewed up and spit out by his profession, and that spark, that need to find the truth that drew him to the profession in the first place. Despite giving off real gamer dad energy, Yagami's struggle is truly multifaceted and human in a way that makes returning to Yakuza feel even more cartoonish than it already is, without sacrificing any of the crazy twists and turns that make these games as thrilling as they are. This is easily the best writing in a Team Dragon game since Zero, and the fact it's now directly bolstered through gameplay makes it all the more delightful. The fact is, even with its imperfections, Judgment is the most a game commanded my attention all year, and I cannot wait to see what the team has in store for Yakuza 7. So I hope you enjoyed my list of what I thought were the best games of 2019, but like last year, I also thought it would be cool to take a moment to shout out some channels I think you should check out going into the new year. Zach Fraser is one of the dudes I've known longest since starting the channel, and is probably the most perpetually shirtless man in this whole sphere of video creation. His videos are often as surreal and hilarious as they are incisive, and his piece on Magic Mike XXL remains one of the best videos I've seen on this entire site, period. Liam Triforce's retrospectives have become real comfort viewing for me over the last year. This is, of course, to say nothing of their substance. His pieces are consistently engaging, but there's just something so whimsical about the way he discusses games he's really passionate about. His excitement is contagious, even if I've never played the games he's talking about. Hot Cider, recently rebranded from GamesD, is not only a lovely person I had the pleasure of meeting earlier in the year, he makes snappily edited videos with such concise, conversational writing that it's absolutely criminal he doesn't have a bigger audience. Watch his race car moment video, then watch everything else. Snakerer is a similarly good dude whose deep dives into the physicality of VR games or obscure Russian FPS titles from the mid-2000s can make an hour and a half pass like it was nothing. Just really excellent stuff. And as always, subscribe to Lambhoot. You've got to. He's got what is sure to be the definitive VR video coming in the next couple of weeks. What are you waiting for? Do it already. Tick giddies. And now all of that is out of the way, I'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank my patrons. Every year I make this video and part of me wonders how I got here, and the answer is always you. As I mentioned in my recent update video, it's your pledges that have allowed the channel to continue through many periods where I questioned its sustainability. I feel so incredibly fortunate and grateful to have the unbelievably generous support you've given me. Thank you. If you'd like to join the names on screen and help me keep making videos I want to make, you can head to patreon.com/writingongames and pledge even $1 or $2. I could never thank you enough for your continued support. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Martin Rosat, Artyom Vitsyuk, Leah Chinello, Konstantino Sakinis, Henry Mielik, Edward Clayton Andrews, Hebe Amore, Melemonides the Unwise, Rob, Bryce Snyder, Tommy Carver Chaplin, David Björk, Lucas, Dallas Keane, William Fielder, my dad, Timothy Jones, The Nameless Guy, Ham Migas, Samuel Pickens, Shardfire, Anna Pimentel, Jesse Ryan, Justin's Holderness, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another year of Writing on Games. Stay safe and I will see you in 2020.